My name is Evelyn Grace Mercer. I'm 38 years old, and I live in a small second-floor apartment above a used bookstore in Rochester, New York. I work nights at a nonprofit that helps families navigate housing insecurity. I ride my bike to work when the snow lets me and drink cheap coffee at 2 a.m. on paper cups that steam like small, temporary lampposts. Lately, I have been hollowed out and wide awake at once, tired in my bones, restless with memories, carrying a quiet, slow burn that started the night my mother called me in January to say she'd been admitted to the hospital. Before I dive in, if you're into real stories that hit deep, please consider subscribing. Sharing this isn't easy for me, but maybe someone out there needs to hear it. The emergency room smelled like bleach and lemon cleaner scrubbed into the pores of fluorescent light. My shoes scuffed the tile in a measured rhythm that matched the rigged hopes in my chest. Please be conscious, please be okay. I had driven through wind-whipped slush, the radio static filling the car when I couldn't bear silence. My phone buzzed with messages from friends. "How's she doing?" And with texts from my sister, Rachel, laced with a kind of jagged politeness you'd use with someone you hadn't seen in a decade. They wheeled Mom out on a stretcher with a tube at her throat and eyes like the gray paper of hospital gowns. Monitors clicked. The beep of oxygen was a small, impatient metronome. I perched on the plastic chair by her bed, the vinyl cool against my palms, and said the things you say automatically in the hospital. "Mom, I'm here. I brought the blanket you like." She blinked slowly and then whispered in a voice raw as sandpaper. "Evelyn." I leaned in. I have the silly habit of memorizing the small things about the people I love. The scar at the corner of her lip, the way her hand still smelled faintly of lavender even after a week of no home visits. I wanted to anchor her to me with those tiny facts. But what she said next cracked my chest open in a way I hadn't known it could. Her mouth moved around the sentence like someone adjusting a badly tuned radio. "Your sister deserves the care, not you." It was as if she had pushed the sentence through a narrow corridor and watched the last words tumble out. I remember the air went colder in the room, though the thermostat insisted on a steady warmth. That whisper spun me into a dozen past winters. Years of being the responsible one, the one who stayed, the one who made sure bills got paid. My throat tightened so much I could taste metal. "How?" I started because you try to refute that kind of thing even before it lands. My skin prickled. "Mom, what do you mean?" She looked at me with a tired, almost bewildered tenderness. "Rachel, she needs it." I didn't. Her words thinned. "I didn't do the things I should have, Evie." She reached for my hand and closed around it like a lifeline. Her fingers were cool, papery, distant. The machines filled the silence where more words might have lived. If this is resonating with you so far, a like really helps us reach more people. I had become the steady presence in my family by default and habit. I had stopped drinking coffee in restaurants because Mom couldn't afford the extra cup. I had postponed auditions, political canvassing, relationships, anything that required me to be somewhere inconveniently scheduled. I had cut corners, taken extra shifts, learned to disappear into schedules and checklists so that the phones would stop ringing in the dead of night. Rachel, my younger sister, 9 years my junior, had left home early, moved across states, come back and left again like a season of weather. She was a brilliant, funny mess with quick hands and a laugh that could make any room disarm. She had been reckless in ways that scared me. She forgave easily and burned bridges with a kind of honest fury that made people either love her or keep their distance. So when Mom said her name and then that line, "Your sister deserves the care, not you," it landed with the force of a verdict. I felt something ancient and patient inside me retract in warning, like a tide pulling away from a shore. "What does that mean?" I asked, quieter now, because in hospitals I learned you save energy and words for what matters. "You carried everything," she said. "Too long. I made choices that hurt her. She has scars I couldn't fix. She deserves a chance I never gave her." Her gaze slipped away to the window where afternoon light was turning the parking lot into a smudged silver plate. "You'll understand when you're older." Her eyes flicked back to me, and there was a softness that felt like an apology and a stone that felt like an accusation, both heavy. I sat there, hands folded, listening to the beep of the monitor and the distant hiss of carts in the hallway as nurses passed by, and I tasted something I had thought I'd buried. The small, chronic hollowness of being the one who stayed behind. I wanted to scream. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity that the person who had spent most of my life requiring my tending would now, in a breath, be the architect of my deepest hurt. Instead, I held her hand and let the words settle like dust on my knuckles. The phrase kept echoing, "Not you," an impossible clause that somehow cut through the years and the space between us. Sometimes, the loudest betrayals are the quiet ones, spoken in clipped sentences while IVs drip and fluorescent lights blink. I left the hospital that night with a metallic taste of resignation in my mouth and Rachel's name burning like an unanswered invitation. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear how this ends. I promise you, there are things my mother didn't say that I had to uncover myself. Part 2 will tell you why those words felt like the reopening of an old wound. If the hospital had a scent associated with final conversations, it would be antiseptic and sweat and old coffee. I remember that smell because I have held it to my face and tried to breathe my way through years of decisions that never felt entirely my own. After Mom's whisper, I couldn't leave without answers. I needed to know what deserve meant in her mouth and where that left me. Growing up, our house in suburban Rochester was a narrow white building with a sagging porch and a swing that never seemed to swing. My father left when I was 16, a slow evaporation. First late nights at work, then the occasional weekend, then a presence that belonged to the past. Mom worked as a medical transcriptionist and did odd jobs at the clinic. She signed me up for extra shifts so I could help with rent. Rachel was the one who ran off the porch without looking and got tangled up in things that made my mother tremble. Men with quick tempers, men with empty promises, nights spent on strangers' couches and a string of hospital visits that felt inevitable. I learned to pick up the pieces and tuck them into labeled boxes. Bills, forms, bruises, apologies. You need context to understand why Mom's whisper felt like an erasure of what I had become. For years I had been a human ledger, balancing school, work, and the endless quiet repairs of our family. I paid for groceries and kept a calendar of doctor's appointments. When Rachel skipped rent, I covered it. When she missed her court date after a night of disappearing, I refunded the fine from a paycheck that I'd already counted as spent. I did those things because I loved her and because my mother, in her own way, had asked me to. It felt like an innate obligation, a line drawn that I was meant to hold. In the years Rachel left town, I would see her sporadically, stumbling into our kitchen at 3 a.m, lit up with a frantic excitement about a job she hadn't kept for more than a season, or composed and contrite with another apology I accepted because it eased the house for a while. Once she showed up with magenta hair and a brand new tattoo of a crescent moon, and Mom cried into her hands the way adults do when they are glad to find a lost thing. Yet Rachel always left again. "I'll come back when I have my shit together," she'd say, a little smile. And I believed her because I always wanted to. When Mom whispered that Rachel deserved the care, I remembered nights of listening to my sister's muffled sobs in the bathroom and days when I had covered for her at work, told her manager she'd had a migraine. I also remembered the first time someone said something to me in a way that cut. It was a social worker at Rachel's high school who asked, "Who's really raising her?" The implication didn't have to be spelled out. There was a kind of public folklore about families like ours. The responsible kid, the prodigal, the mother who was trying and failing. One afternoon not long after Mom's hospitalization, I found myself walking through the hospital corridors with a paper coffee cup clutched so hard the cardboard dented. Machines beeped in rooms I passed. A janitor pushed a cart and nodded at me like we shared the same small, exhausted industry of being. I had the urge to find Rachel and demand, to shout the word deserve, until the whole building held its breath. I found her in the hospital lobby, sitting by the windows where the light came low and warm. She had a sweater that swallowed her frame and hair pulled back in a messy knot. She looked older in a way I had stopped expecting, cleaner edges, bones that the years had sharpened. When she saw me, her face smoothed into a practiced surprise and then a burst of affection so quick it was almost rehearsed. "Evie," she said, my childhood nickname that she still used when she wanted to cut through my defenses. She stood and hugged me in a way that had the intimacy of someone who knew your breaks and liked to press fingers into the worst spots. It was a hug that made me wonder whether she had been practicing how to be the forgiven one. I didn't know how to speak to her without the weight of my mother's whisper hanging between us. "Mom said something," I started. She said what?" Rachel asked, brows knitting. Her voice had the low, soft cadence that had once charmed strangers and then nullified them. "Tell me. I'm here." There was the old dynamic. Rachel played the role of the one who showed up when it suited her, and I played the role of the one who catalogued the aftermath. I had built a private narrative in which my sacrifices were a ledger of moral currency, and now that ledger felt worthless in light of my mother's last words. We sat and talked as the light crept along the floor, and pieces began to shift. Rachel told me about a woman in a group home in Ohio who had helped her get a job and a small, steady apartment for 3 months. She spoke of forums and counselors and an attorney who had told her she might qualify for certain benefits, things that had the sound of fresh hope. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to jinx it," she said. Her fingers twisted the rim of her cup. "I know I left. I know I hurt you. I'm trying. Has something like this ever happened to you? Feel free to share in the comments. I'm reading everything." Her trying was real, painfully honest, but so was my exhaustion. In the past, Rachel's trying had often been followed by nights of silence and then excuses. There was a thin, childish part of me that wanted to keep score, to mark how many times she had broken our family and how many times I had been the one to sew it back together. But there was also a deeper, quieter knowledge that people carry histories like hidden rail lines, something under the surface shaping where they end up. That night we sat with our hands wrapped around lukewarm coffee, 2 women grown into the remnants of a family, and the word deserve reverberated between us like a baton neither of us wanted to catch. Part 3 will show how I dug deeper, into old family secrets, into my mother's regrets, and into the small, personal betrayals that changed the course of love. The hospital room had a smell of old rubber bands and too sweet hand lotion, the sort of smell that belonged to rooms where people lived for weeks on end. I had slept in a plastic chair by Mom's bed for 2 nights, and on the 3rd morning I woke with a neck cramp and a persistent low ache behind my ribs, the kind that felt like grief had a gravity of its own. I decided I would force a conversation out of her, or at least unspool the thread that made deserve sound like the final sentence. It was harder than I thought. You can't make someone tell you the shape of their guilt if they are still holding it like a scavenged amulet. Mom's voice stuttered and retracted, but sometimes, when the morphine settled her like a soft tide, she'd drift into clarity. "You were good," she said once, eyes on the curtain. "You held the house together even when I couldn't." "I did what needed to be done," I said. "But why do you think Rachel deserves the care? What about me? I've been the one." "Because I ruined her," Mom interrupted, and it was the first time in decades I'd heard such bluntness from her. She tasted like copper. "I chose things for myself when I should have fought for her. I let her go because I was embarrassed, Evelyn. There are letters. There's a man I knew who could have helped us. I didn't accept his help for her then." "You're apologizing to me by giving her a bed?" I asked, not gentle. "Is that how this works?" She closed her eyes. The hospital light reflected like a coin in her eyelids. "There are medical decisions, Evie. There are windows that only open for a time. She's younger. She can survive things I thought impossible. I did what I thought was right then, but not right for her. She hasn't had a steady hand. You have." Then she said something I wasn't prepared for, something that rewired my memory of long nights and suppressed words. "You were always practical. You didn't ask for the soft things. You asked for us to be alive." She squeezed my hand hard enough to hurt. "You'll never understand, not entirely. You have what you need inside. Rachel never did." My breath jerked. The claim that I had been less deserving wasn't couched in rational logic. It was guilt doing what guilt does, looking for absolution by assigning blame. Her confession about an unnamed man hit me like a blow to the ribs. It opened corridors of possibility. Was there a secret benefactor? A donor we'd never known? Had she refused help to keep pride? To keep some dignity she thought her daughters deserved? I started pulling at threads. That weekend I went through old boxes in our attic, The boxes you keep because they smell like the people you were. There were letters, yes, folded and smudged. One from a man named Harold, someone my mother had dated before my father left. He'd offered to take my sister to boarding school, offered to help pay for courses, to remove the burden of bills that always hovered. My mother had written a return note, short and polite, declining. I thought it would hurt her to be separated from us, she told me later, confronted in a way she hadn't been before. I thought it would make her feel abandoned by me. Her hands were shaking then. I thought I could fix it all myself. That refusal explained a lot. Rachel's long list of near misses, the nights on strangers' couches, the way she learned to survive chaos. But it did not explain why Mom's hand was now heavy in favor of Rachel. The answer had the bitter, honest shape of atonement. "Do you understand what it's like to decide who gets help?" she asked me in a whisper one evening. "When I was young, I thought the world was fair. I thought if I worked hard enough, it would compensate for loss. But life, it doesn't work like arithmetic. There are lives that are salvageable if you act. Sometimes you only get one chance to do the right thing." I remember the tiny tremor in her voice, the way regret made room in her chest where pride used to live. "I have spent decades trying to fix the past, Evelyn. I thought by choosing Rachel I could undo something. It might be selfish, an attempt to quiet a sorrow. I don't expect you to forgive me." There were conversations with social workers, too, sharpened, practical. They spoke of eligibility, prognosis, and resource allocation with a bluntness that made me feel like an accountant for human futures. "You can advocate for her," one nurse told me. "You can arrange for in-home care if that's what you want. Many families split care. But sometimes the patient or the family makes a moral choice. It's messy." That word, messy, fit our family like a puzzle piece. We had been messy for years. Messy with apologies, messy with promises, messy with the way we loved one another and failed. As I listened to Mom confess that she had refused a helping hand when it could have changed Rachel's trajectory, the smell of lemon cleaner in the hospital felt like the smell of surfaces scrubbed to cover stains. That night I sat in the chair and felt the narrative I had constructed, of being the default caregiver, shiver into other shapes. I was furious, yes, but there was also a hard, aching thread of compassion. For reasons I could not completely justify, my mother had chosen to live with a certain kind of dignity rather than accept help that might have separated the family. That was her failure and her horror simultaneously. If this is resonating with you, a like helps more people hear these kinds of stories. When I finally confronted Rachel with the letters, she reacted in a way that made me realize how much living apart had carved spaces into our souls. She read the name Harold and laughed once, short and bitter. "Of course," she said. "Of course someone offered to help. But then again, who knows if it would have changed anything. I never wanted to be a charity project." Her words stung because they were true. People are rarely saved by money alone. Love, stability, boundaries, and accountability matter. Yet there was a gaping feeling in me, a lobby of loss, where a different choice might have led to a less fraught life. I began to understand that my mother's whisper in the hospital bed was not a clean betrayal. It was a knot of regret, shame, and a desperate attempt to reassign grace. I had to decide how to respond. The next part will show the confrontation that came in the corridor outside a physical therapy office. The moment when my sister and I stopped telling polite versions of our histories and began to speak the truth, the whole, painful truth, to each other. I remember the corridor outside the physical therapy room like the spine of a book. Long, sterile, interrupted by the occasional poster proclaiming the benefits of deep breathing and small steps. That's where Rachel and I finally stopped orbiting each other with caution and started moving straight toward the center of whatever kept us apart. She emerged from the room with a walker and a grim expression, laughing at nothing that was funny. Her hands shook just slightly when she gripped the handles. For a moment the image of the reckless girl I'd once known clashed with the person before me. Someone bruised but trying, fragile and stubborn at once. I felt a cold sort of admiration that unsettled me. "Evelyn," she said softly. "I heard about Mom. I didn't know. You didn't." I flinched at the obviousness of the pain in that question. "You always know what you want to know." I wasn't told everything, she replied. You were always the one to get called. I got packets, not the late-night calls. I got a text sometimes. We need you. But not the details. She paused, then added, I'm sorry for that. The apology sounded like a band-aid. There's a difference between being sorry for the literal act of absence and being sorry for the deeper, structural absence of support. Still, her eyes were honest, and there was an exhaustion there that couldn't be faked. Mom said I don't deserve it, I said, the words coming out more raw than I intended. She told me you deserved the care, not me. How do you live with that? Rachel's face shifted in a way that made me peer for motives. For a moment I saw the girl who'd once told me not to wait for her. Then she took a breath like she was gathering something from the floor. You know what I've always thought? That Mom loved you for being practical and me for being dramatic. That she believed practicality was a virtue and drama a liability. But that doesn't mean she loved you more. It means she relied on you. Her voice had the steady smallness of someone who has been practicing self-interviewing. I think she wanted to make a different choice now because she carries guilt like a second skin. We argued in the way siblings do. Quotidian barbs that double as shields. You left, I accused. You left when we needed you. I left because I was dying in there, she shot back. Do you think I left for fun? There were nights I couldn't sleep because I was scared of myself. I would call and cry and you would fix it, and it made me feel worse for being the problem. I needed space to find something steady, and I didn't know how to get it without disappearing. There was bitterness in both of us, not the kind that evaporates in a day. We traded memories of small cruelties. My count of the times I covered her mistakes, her count of the times she'd felt shadowed and minimized. It was messy, tender, and utterly true. The physical sensation of arguing, my heart thready, my palms sweaty, a hollow bloom in my stomach, reminded me that our wounds were still raw. When we finally fell quiet, Rachel reached out and placed her hand over mine on the walker. Her skin was warm, calloused where she'd worked odd jobs. I don't want Mom to die worrying we didn't try. And I don't want to be the reason you feel abandoned, she said. I want to do this with you, not against you. Maybe it was the brevity of her plea or the way the fluorescent lights made her eyes look younger than they were, but something inside me softened. I imagined years of more small reconciliations rather than dramatic salvations. It would mean me sharing the strain rather than carrying it alone, and it was so tempting to relinquish the role of the only steady hand. It was also terrifying. Later, when we visited Mom together, the three of us fit into the small, clinical space like an awkward family portrait. The machines hummed around us and the sun slotted in through blinds. Mom smiled weakly and reached out for both our hands. For the first time in a long while, I understood an image I had avoided. That care could be communal, messy, and not owned. Evelyn, Mom said, voice soft as gauze. I am sorry I ever made you feel invisible. I should have fought for both of you differently. Her confession did not erase my anger, nor did it absolve the years of labor and quiet resentment I had kept, but it reframed them. I had spent decades storing resentment as if it were a currency, paying it forward in small silences, when what likely mattered more was how we surfaced to meet each other. There was a lesson in that. The thin line between duty and resentment, and the way gratitude can sometimes be weaponized into expectation. Sometimes healing is not a sweeping gesture but an accumulation of small, honest acts. I began to think about what I actually needed. A life where I wasn't always putting out fires, a relationship with my sister that included boundaries, and a mother whose apologies were matched with practical change rather than performative remorse. If this story is haunting you, consider liking. Little acts of solidarity make these narratives louder. We arranged a plan with a social worker. Shane in intake spoke frankly about in-home care, therapy for Rachel, and possibilities for splitting responsibility. Our family's future would not be neatly packaged. There would be late nights, missed shifts, and adjustments. But there was also dignity, an offer to try together. Rachel's attempts to get steady work might fail again. Mine might mean more sacrifice in the short term. The hospital, oddly, felt like a place of beginning, not only ending. That night, in the small dark of my apartment, I felt the old insomnia settle in, not the kind born of sleeplessness but the kind that comes with reckoning. My chest ached with a new mix of fear and a slender hope. Part 5 will tell you how I finally chose what care looks like when you must balance truth, love, and your own limits, and what I learned about forgiveness, boundaries, and the quiet architecture of family. Making choices about care is like assembling furniture with missing screws. You know roughly what it should look like when finished, but you spend some of the time improvising and cursing softly. Our hospital plan felt similar, a hybrid of home visits, outpatient therapy, and shared shifts. It would demand negotiation, patience, and regular check-ins that we had never been good at managing. The first week after Mom came home was a series of micro-revelations. The little things, how Mom preferred her pills sorted in a wooden box we hadn't used since I was 12, the way she loved the television show that played gentle court cases, the smell of broth she tried to make that was more salt than soup, became the scaffolding for what care would look like. Rachel showed up on alternating days. Sometimes with a casserole in a glass dish she refused to let me throw away. She would call at odd hours to remind me when a nurse was late, leaving messages I played back and rewound like a rosary. Some nights were easy. Mom laughing at a joke from a show, me and Rachel trading stories like old friends. Other nights felt like a negotiation where we both wanted different outcomes. I struggled with being present without becoming swallowed. My body remembered the years of blanked-out meals and missed concerts. My mind catalogued resentments I had tuned out to survive. The physical sensations returned sometimes. Tight knuckles, a cold throat, a pulse that would spike when the phone rang unexpectedly. Forgiveness did not arrive as thunder. It arrived as small, consistent things. Rachel showing up to a medical appointment on time. Mom apologizing and then actually making the call to the social worker rather than assigning me the task. My own decision to let go of the scorekeeping that had anchored me for so long. The scene that changed me was small. Rachel sat on the edge of Mom's bed with a stack of bills and said, "Let me handle this one." She laid out what she could pay and where she needed time. She didn't ask me to cover or to rescue. She asked to be trusted with responsibility. I realized then how much of my pain had stemmed from my identity being tied to rescue. My value measured by how much I could carry. Letting Rachel take on a piece of that burden was terrifying because it meant relinquishing control and, more profoundly, reimagining my worth as independent from caretaking. I had to learn new vocabulary. Co-care, boundaries, agreements. I had to learn to say no without guilt. It was practical and radical. There were setbacks. Rachel relapsed once. Small things at first, a skipped therapy appointment, a hidden bottle left in a trash bag, and it sent me into a loop of shame and fury. We confronted the relapse together in a kitchen that had seen so many lesser arguments. She cried, and I felt my reflex go toward the bandage. Fix it, patch it, make it better. But this time we were two wounded people deciding what accountability looked like. An increase in outpatient support, a commitment to a nightly check-in, and a moment where I stepped back and asked for outside help instead of assuming the role alone. For the first time I saw us as a team rather than a hierarchy. We began to share the labor and the praise. There were days when I felt resentful, but I could name it and bring it to the table. The honesty of those moments meant our compassion had a shape. My mother, on her best days, sat on the sofa and watched us like someone who had finally learned a lesson too late. She apologized in a way that had edges of real change, calling the woman who had offered help so many years ago and acknowledging, not defending, the decision she had made. What did I learn from all of this? That deserving is not a finite commodity doled out by judgments in hospital rooms. Deserving is a messy, shared project. Something you build together when you accept imperfect people and give them the tools to become less broken. My mother's whispered verdict, "Not you," was not a quitclaim to my pain entirely. It was an admission of a failure she wanted to correct. It was also a test. Could I allow a person I loved to take what they thought they needed without proving my own worth in exchange? If this resonates, please leave a comment. What would you have done in my shoes? We are all mixtures of shame and love, of choices that looked right at the time and consequences that arrived later. My sister and I aren't fixed. We are projects. We still bicker. We still carry scars. But we also share small victories. Rachel walking through a park on a crisp day without the weight of someone else's rescue. Mom smiling without apology. Me enrolling in a pottery class I'd been postponing because I thought my time belonged to other people. When I stand in the kitchen at dawn, the house still smells faintly like broth and lemon cleaner, but also like coffee and a kettle Rachel refuses to let me throw away. I sometimes think back to that first hospital whisper and feel a strange gratitude for how it forced the conversation we had been avoiding for years. It was a blow. It was an invitation. The lesson I carry now is not tidy. It's more like a work of maintenance. Love requires boundaries, forgiveness requires honesty, and care requires humility. If you are carrying the burden for another person, know that stepping back doesn't mean abandoning them. Sometimes it means allowing them to learn to tie their own shoes. Sometimes it means asking for help. Sometimes it means redefining what deserve even is. Thank you for staying with me through this. If you've been moved, consider subscribing. There are more stories like this, and I promise to tell them honestly. And if you have your own story, share it below. I'm reading everything, and you're not alone.